The day money became worthless didn't happen with an explosion. There was no big announcement and no switch flicked overnight. It happened quietly, in boardrooms, in central banks, and closed meetings between politicians and economists. That decision changed how the entire world thought about value. That was the day the gold standard died, and that's what we're going to look at in this video. Please do subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps this small channel grow. For centuries, money was backed by something real. You could take a paper note to a bank and exchange it for actual gold. The system was simple. Every dollar, every pound, every other currency represented a fixed amount of metal locked away in vaults. It wasn't just faith, it was math. Governments couldn't print more money unless they had more gold to match it, and that discipline gave money meaning. It limited debt, kept inflation under control, and tied the global economy to something you could hold in your hand. But then came the cracks: wars, recessions, and politics. During World War I, countries suspended the gold standard so that they could print money to fund the war. After the dust settled, they tried to return to it, but the math no longer worked. Too much paper money, not enough gold. Economies stumbled trying to force an old system to fit a new world. The Great Depression made it worse. Deflation, unemployment, and panic. Countries started abandoning gold just to survive. By the mid-20th century, the world tried to rebuild order. In 1944, the Allies met in a place called Bretton Woods, and they created a new version of the gold standard, one that made the US dollar the anchor of global trade. Every other currency was pegged to the dollar, and the dollar itself was pegged to gold at $35 an ounce. For a while, it worked. The post-war boom lifted living standards, rebuilt economies, and created decades of stability. People trusted money because it was backed by something solid. But underneath, the system was already cracking. The US started spending more than it had on wars, welfare, and rebuilding the world. Dollars were flowing out of America faster than gold was coming in. Foreign countries began to notice this, and they started demanding gold for their dollars, just like the system allowed. Gold reserves drained fast, and confidence started to wobble. Then came August 15, 1971, the day money became paper. President Richard Nixon went on TV and calmly announced that the US would temporarily suspend the dollar's convertibility into gold. That word temporarily was doing a lot of work here, because once the gold window closed, it never reopened. The dollar was no longer backed by gold, it was backed by nothing but trust. That moment, known now as the Nixon Shock, ended the last connection between money and something tangible. From that point on, every currency in the world became fiat money, meaning it had value because the government said so, not because it was tied to a commodity, and that changed everything. At first, it seemed fine. Economies kept growing, trade continued, people still used money as before, but the rules had changed completely. Before 1971, governments couldn't just create money out of thin air. Gold reserves acted as a brake. Now they could print as much money as they wanted. Debt exploded, inflation soared, and the 1970s became a decade of chaos. Oil shocks, price surges, and falling wages. The discipline of gold was gone, replaced by the politics of paper. To understand how big this shift was, imagine you're living in 1971. Overnight, your money, your savings, your salary, your pension is no longer tied to anything real. It's just paper, and its value depends entirely on how responsible your government is. For the first time in modern history, money became a concept rather than a promise. That's why some people call it the day money became worthless. Not because it lost all value immediately, but because it lost its anchor. From then on, value was whatever markets and governments said it was. Central banks could now create money with keystrokes, and they did. The results are still visible everywhere. Before the 1970s, national debt was tiny compared to GDP. After the gold standard ended, debt curves went vertical. Inflation became normal. Prices of everyday things rarely stopped rising. $1 in 1971 had the same buying power as about $8 today. In the UK, a house that cost £10,000 back then would now be worth hundreds of thousands. That's not all growth, that's inflation. The thing about gold was that it forced accountability. You couldn't fake it. You couldn't print more of it, it was scarce, it took effort to mine, and it held intrinsic value across cultures and centuries. When that link broke, money became infinite, and when something becomes infinite, it starts to mean less. Since 1971, we've entered what economists call the fiat era. Central banks manage economies by adjusting interest rates and printing currency. The problem? Once you start using money as a tool instead of a measurement, it's hard to stop. Every crisis since, from the dot-com bubble to the 2008 crash to the pandemic has been met with more money creation. Trillions pumped into the system to keep it afloat. Each time inflation rises a little higher, debt climbs a little further, and the value of money quietly erodes. Gold, however, still sits in vaults, still limited in supply, still immune to money printing. It doesn't pay interest, it doesn't grow, but it doesn't vanish either. Every time trust in fiat money wobbles, when a bank fails, or inflation spikes, or governments overspend, people still rush back to gold. That's the irony of the modern economy. We act like money has evolved, sleek, digital, fast-moving, but at its core it's built entirely on faith. Your bank balance or your savings, they're all just promises backed by confidence, and confidence can be fragile. So when people say the day money became worthless, they're talking about that loss of grounding. The moment when our global financial system went from something tangible to something theoretical, when paper stopped being a claim on gold and became a claim on trust. It's not that the gold standard was perfect, it limited growth, caused deflation and couldn't handle modern trade, but it kept government spending in check. That's why every few years the same question comes back. Should we return to gold? The short answer is probably not. It would be almost impossible now. There isn't enough gold to back the trillions of dollars, pounds and euros in circulation, and the global economy would seize up overnight. Do you think we should try to find a way to bring back the gold standard, or should central banks continue with the current fiat system? Let me know down in the comments, and please do subscribe if you've enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.